The wind don't care who it takes. Comes down off the ridgeline like it's got a score to settle. Don't knock, don't wait, don't whisper. Just slams through the trees and scrapes its claws, cross your bones, till you remember what cold really is. Some men say God sends storms to wash the world clean. Others say he don't send nothing, he just watches. Truth is, you stop asking after a while. You just learn to brace the door and keep the fire fed. There was a time this place was warm. Laughter in the walls, boots at the hearth, a boy's voice singing off-key, thinking he was quiet. But winter don't just take crops and cattle, it takes things slower, things you don't see going until they're gone. Sometimes the family you lose ain't the last family you'll know. Sometimes the family you choose is the one fate blows in with the storm. And sometimes you're left asking, what kind of man are you when the storm finally comes back, bringing more than just snow? Whatever you thought you buried out here, it don't stay buried for long. Snow lay deep on the ground, the kind that creaked like old wood under boot. The sky was a pale sort of grey, stretched thin and empty over the mountain, the kind that never promised a break in the cold. A man moved slow across it, thick coat, battered hat, axe over his shoulder, like he wasn't in much of a hurry to get anywhere, least of all back. The cabin was no more than 4 walls and a roof, half sunk into the hill, wind-scarred and weather-worn. Smoke drifted lazy from the stovepipe. Inside, the heat didn't reach the corners. It just kept things from freezing solid. He stacked the wood tight by the hearth, each piece thudding against the next with measured rhythm. Not work, not labor, just a routine, the kind a man does, 'cause if he don't, there's nothing left but listening to the quiet, and the quiet had teeth. A tin plate sat on the blee, crust of beans left from the night before. He hadn't had the mind to wash it, hadn't mattered. Nothing did much lately. Over by the window, a rifle leaned in the corner. Loaded. Always. A wooden box sat beneath the bed, locked. But the lock was more habit than need. He never opened it. Didn't want to look at what was inside, not just yet. There were letters on the shelf, tied with string, browned at the corners. One of them still had blood on the edge. His hands had shook when he'd found it. They didn't now. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters like it wanted in. He poured water from the kettle, drank it warm, swallowed like it hurt. The dog, an old mutt with more scars than fur, lifted its head from the rug but didn't bother moving. The man stared into the fire a long while. Flames flickered soft against his face, bringing lines out of hiding. A long scar cut across his jaw, pale and deep, a gift from someone he never named. He hadn't spoken in days. There wasn't anyone to speak to. He didn't mourn, not out loud. Grief out here didn't howl. It just sat quiet in the room with you, breathing your air. When he finally laid down, it was with his boots on, coat still buttoned. Not out of readiness, just didn't see the point. Morning would come the same way it always did. Grey, cold, unforgiving. Same as him. The wind changed around nightfall. He felt it before he heard it, tight in his chest, like the air had thinned. Sky went bone white behind the trees, and the pines started swaying like they knew something he didn't. He stepped out, eyes narrowing against the first flurry, and pulled his coat close around his neck. Snow came fast, thick, blinding, like someone had split open the heavens and dumped all the weight of winter at once. He could barely see the fence line from the porch. He checked the windows, stuffed the cracks with rags where the wind got it, and tossed another log in the stove and shut the latch with a clang. The old dog paced once, restless, then curled by the hearth. The man sat down, jaw set, boots heavy on the floor. It was the kind of storm that didn't just howl, it screamed. Then came the pounding. 3 hard knocks, a pause, another. He stood up slow, uncertain. Could have sworn the wind was just playing tricks. But then, a cry, faint but sharp. A woman's voice. And something smaller, a child. He moved to the door, hand brushing the rifle out of habit, then stopping. Another knock, weaker this time, not a threat, a plea. He unbarred it. The wind near tore the door off its hinges. Snow whipped in, stinging his face raw. And there she was, barely upright, hair matted with ice, face bloodless, a bundle clutched in her arms. Behind her, a smaller shape, a girl, maybe 7 or 8, half buried in the drift, eyes wide with shock. The man didn't speak, just stared at them for a long second. The woman tried to say something. Mouth moved, but no sound came. Her knees buckled. He caught her before she hit the floor. The girl didn't run, didn't cry, just stood there, blue-lipped and still, her little fingers gripped around a younger boy's hand, no more than 4, wrapped in a threadbare coat, shivering so hard his teeth clicked. The man pulled them inside, kicking the door shut with his boot. Heat slapped them like a wall. The fire popped, casting their shadows high and wild on the logs. He stripped the snow-caked coats from the children, set the woman on a blanket near the stove. The dog growled low, uncertain, then backed off. The woman groaned, still conscious, but not for long. He fetched water, pressed it to her lips. She drank in jerks, like every swallow hurt. The boy coughed once. The girl's eyes never left him. The man knelt, staring at them like they were ghosts he didn't trust. "Where in hell do you come from?" he muttered, not expecting an answer. Outside, the wind roared louder than ever. Inside, the only sound was the fire and the slow, rattling breath of a woman too cold to speak. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. He just reached for another blanket. The wind hadn't let up by morning. It scratched and moaned at the walls like a wounded thing trying to crawl inside. Snow piled high outside the window, muting the world to nothing but white. Inside, the fire held strong. The old stove hissed and popped as wood burned down to coals. Heat clung low to the floor, thick enough to keep breath from fogging, thin enough to remind them the cold was still out there, waiting. He moved quiet through the room, hands careful, laid more broth in the pan, set out dry socks near the hearth, boots lined up to steam. The woman lay under a wool blanket, pale but breathing easier. Her lips weren't blue no more, just dry and cracked. One of her arms curled instinctively toward the boy beside her. The girl sat close by, cross-legged on the floor, hair damp, tangled like old brush. She stared straight at the man, chin resting on her knees, eyes sharp, too sharp for her age. He didn't meet her gaze, just ladled broth into a tin cup and handed it over. She took it without a word. The boy coughed, weak but waking. The dog came close, gave the child a sniff, then lay back down with a huff. It wasn't until midday that the woman finally opened her eyes proper. She blinked slow, then tensed as her memory caught up. She tried to sit. "Easy," he said, voice rough from disuse. "Ain't no rush." She blinked at him, looked around the cabin, then toward her children. "They're all right," he added. She looked again, saw the boy sleeping, the girl drinking warm broth. Her breath left her in a sigh that sounded too heavy for someone so thin. "You saved us," she said, barely a whisper. He didn't answer. After a long pause, she spoke again. "Name's May." He nodded once, didn't ask. She seemed to smile at that, just barely. The girl finally spoke. "My name's Clara. He's Tommy." The boy stirred at his name but didn't wake. The girl looked up at the man. "What's yours?" He hesitated. "Doesn't matter." She tilted her head. "It does to me." He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under him. "Call me whatever suits you." That was all he gave. Later, he handed May a clean shirt and dry skirt, clothes that hadn't seen light in years. She changed behind the hanging blanket he'd rigged across the back corner. When she came out, she looked more alive. Still weak, but her spine had steel. She didn't ask questions either. Not yet. Clara watched everything. Every move the man made, every time his hand hovered near his belt, every glance toward the door. Tommy followed her lead, quiet, eyes flicking between the adults. That night, they sat near the fire, no one saying much. The snow outside tapped soft against the glass, like it was still waiting to be let in. He offered them more stew. Clara ate quick, Tommy slower. May only picked at hers. "You got family?" she asked him finally. He stared into the fire. "Had," he said. "Don't anymore." She didn't press. There was a photo frame on the shelf above the hearth, turned face down. May noticed, but didn't ask. The cabin held warmth now, but it wasn't comfort, not yet. Every silence felt like it might break into shouting if anyone breathed wrong. May curled up with Tommy on the cot. Clara laid out under a buffalo hide on the floor. The man sat back down in his chair, eyes on the fire, a rifle across his knees, not pointed at them, but close enough to remind them. He didn't sleep that night, just listened. And in the dim flicker of the coals, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't alone. The storm passed, but the quiet that came after wasn't peace. It was the kind that pressed on your ribs and sat behind your ears, waiting for something to break. The snow didn't melt, not out here. It just settled lower, crusted over hard by the wind. Days rolled slow, pale mornings, long shadows, nights spent close to the fire, with the wind still whispering through the cracks. The man rose before light most mornings, out the door with his axe before breath could fog the windows. He didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, words came like pulling teeth. He moved with purpose, but not hurry, chopped wood with a rhythm that didn't change, like time didn't matter anymore. Clara trailed after him sometimes, careful not to ask too many questions, just watched. Drew things in the dirt with a stick. Trees, a horse, the shape of a man holding hands with two smaller ones. He saw it once and said nothing, just turned back to his chopping. Tommy stuck closer to May. He didn't talk much either, not unless she whispered first. The boy was quick with his hands, though, helped stir the pot, fetched water when the wind allowed. His cough had eased, but the shadows hadn't left under his eyes. May moved slow those first few days, still carrying the cold in her bones. But she stood tall when she moved, like she'd learned not to show the ache. She watched the man more than she looked at him, studying the way he folded things, the way he stayed silent when the children laughed. He never laughed. At supper, they sat around the table. 4 plates. One man, always last to sit. He chewed with care, as if the sound of eating too loud might startle the peace. "You built all this yourself?" May asked one evening, spoon paused halfway to her mouth. He nodded. "Why here?" He didn't answer. Clara looked up from her plate. "It's real quiet here." The man's eyes flicked toward her, then back down. "That's the point." Tommy asked, "Was there someone here before?" His spoon stopped. May noticed the tightness in his jaw. "There was," he said. "Long time back." He stood and cleared his plate before anyone could speak again. Later, May found him outside by the woodpile, hands blackened with bark, and as the moon hung low and orange behind the trees. "You had a family, didn't you?" she said, not as a question. He didn't look at her. "Boy," he said, "about your son's age. Used to chase birds till he dropped." May waited. He didn't go on. She asked, quiet, "And your wife?" He nodded once. "They're buried just past the trees." May glanced toward the darkness beyond the cabin. "You mark the graves?" He looked down at his hands. "Did once. Snow takes what it wants." Inside, Clara was drawing again. Tommy had fallen asleep beside the fire, curled around the old dog. The girl's pencil scratched across the page. She turned it toward the man when he stepped back inside. It was the 4 of them, him, May, Clara, Tommy, all standing in front of the cabin. The lines were rough, the faces simple, but something about it stuck in his throat. He handed it back without a word. That night, May tucked the kids in and sat by the fire. He stayed in his chair, boots still on, rifle leaned beside him like always. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The ghosts weren't loud, but they were always there, at the table by the stove just past the window. Some ghosts looked like memory, some looked like a second chance. The wind died off, like it finally got tired of screaming. The sky cleared for the first time in weeks, showing nothing but pale blue stretched across the ridgeline. Drifts softened. The sun lit the snow in that blinding way that made everything feel farther than it was. Inside, the air had a different weight to it. Not warm, not cold, just uncertain. May folded clothes near the fire. Tommy was humming, tracing shapes on the fogged window with his finger. Clara sat on the floor, brushing the old dog's fur, talking to it like it could answer. The man stood by the door, hands in his pockets, boots wet from the morning's walk down to the creek. It should have felt like a morning any other, but it didn't. That afternoon, May packed a small bundle. Just enough food for a few days, a single change of clothes. No one asked her why. They didn't have to. Clara's eyes widened when she saw the bundle. "We're leaving?" May nodded slow. "Storm's past." Tommy stared at his boots. "Where will we go?" She didn't answer. The man watched from the porch as she stepped outside, bundle in hand, scarf wrapped tight around her neck. The wind wasn't cruel today, just cold. He didn't stop her, didn't offer to help, didn't call after her, just stood there, arms crossed, jaw locked, as she stared out over the snow-covered trail. "Not much out that way," he said finally, voice low. "I know. You got people?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." He nodded, like that answered something for both of them. "Wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, quieter. "Rarely is." That night, she didn't unpack the bundle, but she didn't leave either. The kids went to sleep early, sensing the stillness hanging in the room. He sat by the fire, sharpening his knife with slow, steady strokes. She sat across from him, hands clasped, eyes watching the flames. It took him near an hour to speak. "You could stay," he said. She looked up. He didn't flinch. Not asking for nothing, just offering. May stared a long while. "You want company?" He shook his head. "Had that. Once. Didn't last." "Then why?" He looked toward the loft where Clara and Tommy slept, breaths soft in the dark. "Because maybe the silence got too loud." May glanced down, thumbs worrying the edge of her skirt. "Could be a while before another storm rolls in," she said. "Could be." She didn't say yes, didn't say no. She just left the bundle by the door and sat beside him in the quiet, the knife still scraping slow against stone, the fire throwing long shadows across the cabin walls. And for the first time since the world turned sideways, they both sat still, not alone, not yet together, just still. The town lay flat beneath the sun, dust curling off the road like smoke from a dying fire. Wooden buildings leaned tired against each other, paint peeling, windows thick with grit. A place that hadn't changed much, save for the people inside it, older now, harder in the eyes. They rode in slow, the man up front, reins loose in one hand. May sat behind him on a borrowed mule, Clara and Tommy on a sway-backed mare tied close. The horses' hooves made little sound on the dry-packed dirt, but still heads turned as they passed. Folks stared like they'd seen ghosts. Maybe they had. A boy spat in the street and whispered something to his friend. An old woman crossed herself, stepping back into the mercantile. Two men in front of the saloon went quiet mid-laugh. May held her head straight, eyes forward. Clara clung to her waist. Tommy asked under his breath, "Why are they looking like that?" She didn't answer. The man didn't slow, didn't speed up either, just rode steady down the main drag like he'd done it 100 times, which he had, just not in years. He pulled the horse up outside the general store and swung down, boots hitting the ground with a thud. Dust kicked up and settled quick. May followed, pulling Clara and Tommy gently off the mare. Inside, the store smelled of molasses, sawdust, and kerosene. Shelves were mostly full, save for sugar and flour. A bell above the door jangled when they entered. The storekeeper looked up, and his face hardened like sun-baked clay. "You," he muttered. May stayed near the door. The man stepped forward, pulling a folded list from his coat. "Need salt oats, lye soap, sack of cornmeal, 2 pairs of boots. The storekeeper didn't move. Didn't think you'd show your face again. Didn't come to be seen. A beat. The storekeeper's jaw worked. You still got his blood on your name. She don't wear his name, the man said, voice like gravel. And she sure as hell didn't hang him. A long silence. The storekeeper moved slow, gathering the items, one eye always on them. Outside, Clara peered through too. Dusty window. A woman in a bonnet walked past, pulling her child by the arm. The child looked back and waved. Clara waved too, but the woman yanked the child's hand harder. Tommy stared at a jar of candy sticks on the counter. He didn't ask for one. May stood stiff as a fence post, hands white-knuckled around the strap of her bag. The bell rang again. The sheriff stepped inside, thumb hooked in his belt, mustache thick, hat low over his eyes. He looked first at May, then at the man. "She's not yours," he said, flat. "She's not yours either," the man replied. "I remember her," the sheriff continued. "She was crying in the street while her man swung, not a year ago. You really think folks forgot?" The man stepped between them. "Didn't come to stir nothing, just need supplies." "She can't stay," the sheriff said. "You know that." "I don't reckon she's asked to." The sheriff looked to the kids. "What about them?" "They want candy," the man said. The sheriff didn't speak again, just turned and walked out, boots hard on the boards. The man placed a few silver dollars on the counter. The storekeeper stared at them like they'd been plucked from hell, but took 'em all the same. They left quiet, sack of supplies slung over the saddle horn. As they passed the church, a bell tolled once. A tall man in black stood at the top of the steps, Pastor Gilroy. May saw him and her step faltered. He nodded once, slow and distant. Inside the church, folks were filing in for evening prayer. They did not wave, did not smile. At the edge of town, Clara looked up. "Are we going back?" May looked to the man. He nodded. Tommy whispered, "I don't like it here." "Neither do I," May murmured. "But sometimes you have to face what doesn't like you back." As they turned from the town, dust curling up behind them, the man glanced once over his shoulder, then forward again, where the road cut back toward the hills. He wasn't built for town anymore. Maybe he never had been. The fire had burned low. Coals glowed soft in the belly of the stove, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, the cold had come back, not loud like before, but settled and certain, the kind of cold that made its home in your bones and stayed a while. The children were asleep in the loft. Clara had curled herself against the dog, her small hand resting on its back. Tommy breathed slow and even, a thumb tucked against his cheek, face turned toward the wall, like he was dreaming of something gentler than this life. The man sat in his chair, shoulders slumped with the day. May sat across from him, her back to the stove, skirt hem brushing the worn floorboards, a half-darned sock forgotten in her lap. Neither had spoken in over an hour. They hadn't needed to. The quiet between them had changed, no longer sharp like broken glass, but soft, cautious, like two people circling the edge of something they didn't know how to name. He cleared his throat once, low, not to speak yet, just to see if he could. "I've been thinking," he said after a while, eyes still fixed on the fire. May didn't look up, but he could tell she was listening. "This land," he said, "ain't much. Dry most years. Snowed in come winter. Wolves some nights. But it's mine. Paid for in blood and breath." May finally lifted her gaze. He rubbed the scar along his jaw without thinking. "It's got a cabin, a stove that holds heat, a creek that don't dry out till August. It don't offer comfort, but it'll keep you alive if you respect it." She waited. No movement, no sound. "I can put your name to it," he said. "Yours and the kids. I ain't asking for anything that don't come honest. This ain't about love." She blinked slow, once. He looked at her now, full on. This is just about not being run off every time a man remembers who your husband was, about Clara having a roof that won't collapse, about Tommy getting old enough to fight off what's coming, about not being alone no more, if that counts for anything. May sat still, then set the sock aside and folded her hands in her lap. What would it be? She asked. Marriage? He hesitated. Not the kind folks talk about at church. No preacher, no paper, just quiet agreement. Name on the land, room at the table, fire kept lit. She nodded, slow. I don't need flowers, she said. I don't need a man who smiles all the time. I just need to know that if the worst comes back. She stopped, swallowed. We got someone who won't run. He gave the faintest nod. She didn't smile, didn't say yes, didn't say no. She just stayed seated across from him until the fire died down and the dark came in close, and neither of them moved to light another lamp. And that, between the two of them, was enough. For now. Spring came late that year, slow and muddy, with snow still clinging to the north slopes into May. But it came all the same, and with it came the kind of living that didn't ask for permission, just showed up and expected your hands to follow. The cabin held more sound now, not noise, just life. Hammering in the mornings, laughter in short bursts, the shuffle of boots and small feet across the porch. The man still rose early, but he wasn't always first to the stove anymore. Sometimes Clara beat him to it, sleeves rolled, hair tied back, eggs already frying by the time he stepped into the kitchen. She'd grown into the land like it had called her by name, rode the gray pony like she was born in the saddle, hat too big for her head, freckles sharp against sunburned cheeks. She was still quiet, but it wasn't the guarded kind anymore. It was the kind that meant she didn't need to talk to be heard. Tommy grew slower, softer, but sharp in his own way, fixed things before being asked, found a way to snare rabbits where they weren't. Man's traps used to come up empty. He still liked to be near May, liked the steady comfort of her voice reading from old books by lantern light. But when he dug fence holes, he did it side by side with the man, boots in the same dirt, learning where to lean and when to hold. The man changed, but not all at once. He still didn't talk much, still didn't smile with his mouth, but he taught Tommy how to sharpen a blade proper, and he let Clara ride out past the ridgeline without a word of warning, only a quiet look that said, "You know how far is too far." May planted beans along the west wall, tended them like they'd come from her own blood. She moved like she belonged now, not as a guest, not as a woman waiting to leave, but as someone who'd hung her life on the same hook as his. They didn't share a bed, but he built her a chair beside his by the fire, and when she fell asleep there some nights, he let her stay. The scar on his jaw didn't fade, but sometimes, just sometimes, she touched it without asking, and he didn't pull away. In the second year, a man came through with a camera, traveling east to west, trading portraits for food or coin. He took one of them, stiff and sunlit out by the barn. Clara squinted into the light. Tommy held the dog by the collar. May stood with one hand on the man's shoulder. They didn't hang the picture, but May kept it folded in the Bible with the pages she never read, just touched sometimes when the wind got mean. By the third year, he'd carved a sign above the door, Hollow Ridge. Didn't mean much to anyone else, but to them it meant this was more than dirt and wood. It meant roots had taken hold. Sometimes the man would walk out to the edge of the trees, where snow still hid under the brush, and look toward the old graves. He didn't kneel, didn't pray, just stood there, hand on his belt, hat in his hand, like he was giving a quiet update to someone long gone. Back at the cabin, May would be peeling potatoes, the dog curled under the table, kids arguing soft about whose turn. It was to gather eggs. He'd step inside, smell the stew on the fire, the life in the walls, and feel that ache again, the one that never left, not fully, but quieter now. Not gone. But not all that remained. Snow came again, soft and soundless, laying across the hills like a fresh sheet over an old wound. It didn't roar this time, didn't claw at the doors or scream through the trees, just settled in easy, like it belonged there. The cabin stood quiet, chimney smoking steady, Fence lines held firm, barn doors latched, winter wood stacked high and ready. The creek still murmured faint beneath the ice, stubborn in its flow. Inside, the fire cracked low. May sat in her chair, mending a shirt sleeve by lamplight. Her hair was streaked with silver now, but her hands were steady. Tommy, taller than his boots now, came in with snow on his shoulders and smoke in his breath. He stomped it off on the mat, dropped an armload of kindling by the stove, and grinned like it wasn't cold at all. Clara wasn't there. She'd ridden into town early that morning, on her own. She carried herself upright now, like a woman who'd lived through things and knew the worth of silence. He watched from the porch as her silhouette disappeared down the trail, saddle creaking under her, rifle slung loose across her back. No need to worry, she'd be back before dark, always was. The man sat by the woodpile, knife in hand, carving slow at a piece of pine. Not a shape, just motion, just the rhythm of hands that needed something to do. He looked out across the land. It hadn't changed. Trees still bent in the wind, snow still blanketed the rise. But something was different. He was different. Time don't ask your permission. It just passes. A voice in the wind, not loud but clear, said it plain enough. He thought he was rescuing them from the storm, but it turned out they'd rescued him. Inside, laughter broke out, May teasing Tommy over his stitching or maybe something about supper. He didn't move, just smiled, the faint kind that shows in the eyes more than the mouth. The cold came in around him. It didn't bite like it used to. It was just weather now. Want more stories carved from silence, survival, and second chances? Follow for the next chapter in the Wild West Stories series, where every mile is paid in memory and every firelight flicker holds a truth. Subscribe to stay with the characters who refuse to be forgotten. Have a story in your bones? Ask for a custom Western, crafted just for you.